When you're scrolling through endless listings of Rackmount NAS boxes, it's easy to get swept up by glossy photos and a headline that says 8 terabytes for Bay 1U. Then the moment the box arrives, you plug it in, and the reality feels a lot less exciting. The interface is clunky, the performance doesn't live up to the hype, or the RAID setup takes forever. I've seen that happen enough times that I always warn people, don't let a pretty spec sheet be the only thing that sells you. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. The MicroNet MaxNas 4x 8 TB model tries to position itself as a small business workhorse that fits into a single rack unit, promises hot swap drives and AES-256 encryption, and even throws in dual Gigabit Ethernet for redundancy. Those are exactly the kind of features that make you think, maybe this is the one that finally gives me peace of mind for my backups and shared media. But before you hit add to cart, let's walk through what it actually looks like in a day-to-day office, and whether the price tag really matches what you'll get. First, who benefits most from a 1U 4x chassis? If you already run a modest server rack, say a 12U cabinet in a co-working space or a dedicated closet for a growing creative studio, the MaxNas fits neatly without stealing precious rack height. The hot swap drive bays are a genuine time saver. Swapping a failed drive takes about as long as opening a laptop panel, and you don't have to power down the unit. That's a practical advantage for IT admins who need to keep services up while performing maintenance. The device also supports the full suite of RAID levels, including RAID 5 with a hot spare, which gives you a safety net without the overhead of a full RAID 10 array. Now, let's talk about encryption. The built-in AES-256 volume-based encryption runs on the NAS's own processor, so you don't need to buy a separate hardware security module. For businesses handling sensitive client data, think legal firms, medical offices, or any company subject to GDPR, that level of encryption can be a compliance requirement. I ran a quick test with a 2 TB file and the encryption overhead was barely noticeable. Read/write speeds dropped only a few megabytes per second, which is acceptable for backup windows that aren't ultra-tight. One of the headline features is the most advanced backup solution that includes autosync, instant backup, and scheduled jobs. In practice, the web interface lets you set up a folder on the NAS to mirror a Windows server every night at 2 a.m. The autosync runs continuously for any files you add locally, so if a designer drops a new render into the shared project folder, it appears on the NAS within seconds. That immediacy is handy when multiple people are collaborating on large media files. You avoid the "my version is newer" confusion that often plagues cloud drives. The schedule feature also lets you push a weekly snapshot to an off-site location via RSVNC, which is a nice fallback if the rack room ever suffers a power event. However, there are trade-offs you need to weigh. The dual Gigabit Ethernet ports are advertised as a redundancy or load balancing option, but the firmware only supports active backup failover, not true link aggregation. That means you get a backup path if one NIC fails, but you won't double the throughput for heavy data transfers. If your workflow involves moving terabytes of video footage daily, you might hit the 1 gigabit per second ceiling quickly. In that scenario, a NAS with 10 GBE or at least proper LACP would be a better fit. Another practical consideration is the online RAID capacity expansion and RAID level migration. On paper, being able to add a new drive and let the NAS rebalance the array while it stays online sounds perfect. I tried expanding from 3 2 TB drives, RAID 5, to 4 drives, and the migration process took roughly 18 hours, during which the system remained responsive but performance dipped noticeably. If you run a business where nightly backups are non-negotiable, you'll need to schedule that expansion during a true downtime window, or risk slower backup jobs for a day or two. The user interface is clean enough for a seasoned admin, but it's not exactly intuitive for someone whose only experience with NAS devices is a consumer-grade Synology or QNAP. There's no wizard that walks you through setting up a RAID 6 array with a hot spare. You have to manually select each option, and the terminology can feel a bit dated. They still call it JBOD instead of single disk mode. So if you're a small business owner without an IT background, you might need a couple of hours of reading the manual before you feel confident. What about value for money? The MaxNas ships with 4 2TB drives pre-installed, bringing the total raw capacity to 8 TB. After configuring RAID 5 with a hot spare, you're left with about 4 TB usable. If you compare that to a similar priced 4-bay unit from a more mainstream brand that includes 10 GB and a more polished UI, the price difference isn't huge. The real savings here come from the hot swap capability and the built-in encryption, which,